People said when I was reading online, oh, well, if it's a thrip, thrips don't jump. They don't move, so don't worry about it. So keep that in mind for the future, because I can promise you some of them don't jump, but some of them do fly. Welcome to The Art of Gardening. I'm your host, Melissa Lala Johnson, and today I am talking about something that if you love plants, if you have plants, whether they are indoors, outdoors, house plants, grow room, whatever it is, this is definitely something you're going to want to listen to. So I have had quite the battle with thrips on my property, in my grow room, in my house plants over the last few years. And I can firmly say I have finally beat them. Now coming through this past season, had very little trouble with them. So I'm going to be giving you all of the information that I have learned over the last few years that got me to the spot of being able to treat them effectively in an environment like a garden, a large garden. I've got an acre of manicured land outside that has flower beds all the way around it, and inside of it, a grow room and houseplants all through my house. At one point in time, the thrips had made their way through most of everything I just described. So I, back then, had a lot of energy and was able to really try and fight these things. And throughout the years, learned a lot of different things about treating them. So let's get started. I have 1,000 notes on this, so I'm just going to start with my notes. So first of all, thrips are actually very common. So there's 7,700 different types of them, and they're all over the world. And so at first, I didn't think this was going to be such a big deal. What do they look like? So, and there's a couple different kinds of thrips. There's also the beneficial thrips that actually eat the thrips that I'm about to mention that destroy your landscaping and houseplants. But there's two different kinds. So it's about identification and know what to look for to make sure that then you can proceed accordingly. So at first, people said when I was reading online, oh, well, if it's a thrip, thrips don't jump. They don't move, so don't worry. So keep that in mind for the future, because I can promise you some of them don't jump, but some of them do fly. So they're able to look like they're jumping when they're flying from plant to plant. Their activity for flying is at its peak time between 8 and 10 a.m. and then again between 2 to 4 p.m. So they have a couple different life stages. They have a pre-pupa stage, a pupa stage, in an adult stage that they're on the top of the leaves. So the adults you'll see most of the time as tiny little black slivers on the tops of the leaves. And then if you look underneath those same leaves where you see the adults, 9 times out of 10, you will see smaller white to translucent thrips that are on the underside. And then that is also where the pupa live, where you're not able to see them with the naked eye. So you may see some signs underneath. If you flip the leaf over, you may be able to see some signs of the thrips and the pupa, which I'm going to get to in a minute. So what do they like? They like warm, dry weather. I noticed that they would really fire up around here in July. And in the last few seasons, come the beginning of September, I had no leaves on my hydrangea. So why I have not had a lot of photos of the property in the last few years of the hydrangea later in the season, this is why, and I've been very vocal about this. If you follow me, then you know I've definitely mentioned thrips repeatedly. I've had other Art of Gardening episodes on it as I was making my way through this infestation. So this has definitely been a thing for me. So signs that you may have thrips. The leaves are like stippled leaves, deformation of your leaves, discoloration. So one of the main things that I identify now, I can spot a thrip from a mile away by looking at the leaves of my plants. So for instance, they love my hydrangea, which is devastating, but I can look at a leaf and it will have a silvery, grayish, mustard color to it. And the thrips start to feed at the bottom of the plant. So if you look at your plant and the bottom leaves are looking a little yellowy, kind of silvery, and with some spots and things like that, then that is a great sign to check other leaves around that are healthy, because by then they're probably done with that leaf. But if you move on to some of your healthier leaves, you will most likely see those black little slivers I was talking about on the top of the leaf. So the discoloration, spots, and then of course leaf drop, by the time they make their way through the leaf, it damages the leaf so badly it can't pull any energy from the sun to stay alive. It's damaged. The cellular division of the inside of the leaf, the structure is damaged, and the leaf ends up wilting and falling off the plant. So underside may have a residue from females. It's the white translucent females, and then the pupa, it looks kind of like a white dust, which is actually very similar to spider mites. If you look at spider mite damage, it can look very similar. What you're going to look for, if you see webbing in between where the branches meet the leaves, and webbing in there, and then webbing on the backside of the leaves where it may curl, and you see any type of webbing, then that's your sign that you've got spider mites. If you don't see the webbing, you see all these other things that I'm talking about, then that's a good indicator that you have thrips. So let's talk about where you can get them from. In my situation, I purchased plants that I put into my back balcony, into the planters. And I had noticed them, I bought these different types of plants off Etsy, and I received them and kind of put them, they were kind of house plants, but I wanted them to grow outdoors because the growing season's really great here for some of the more succulent style plants. So I put them outside, and they were in the planters. And they can also, though, come in from flower bouquets. I mean, a flower bouquet could be a treasure trove for these things if the flowers had not been treated properly. They can come in on fruits and vegetables. And so again, here they started in some simple balcony plants. Now I noticed them for the first time ever. I didn't even know these things existed until a few years ago, but I noticed them for the first time towards the end of the season. So I looked them up. I see that they're called greenhouse thrips. So the first thing I think is, well, it gets crazy cold here in Kansas City, so they'll probably die in the winter. Not worried about it, right? Well, I neglected to remember that when I was moving a lot of my plants in from that season inside the house. So I brought the potted plants in, and of course, if you follow me, you know I'm pretty hasty, sometimes pretty lazy with this stuff. So I just brought the plants in, never thinking anything of it, figured I would take care of those things. When, if I had any issues indoors, then I would take care of it. Big mistake. So that was the first year. I noticed that I had them and didn't really care about it, brought everything in. And then in that period of time, they started to slowly progress through not only my house plants, but then through the grow room downstairs. So the grow room has great light. I am able to keep humidity in there through the winter. So I was in the process of moving. Every year I would move things in and out of there. I no longer do that. So I no longer bring any plants that were outside into my house at all, for a number of reasons, because the pots just become completely full of insects. The only way I would do it is if I drenched the entire pot with straight hydrogen peroxide and drenched the entire soil surface and the plant with hydrogen peroxide. Other than that, I will not bring anything into my house. So indoors, I noticed them initially on the alligator calicoe downstairs in the basement in the grow room. The tops looked like they were kind of shriveling a little bit, and they were kind of spotted with like a silvery gray pattern. That's when I started to notice that something was not right. And then I started spraying with neem oil. That was the first thing I read to spray with. So I started spraying with neem oil relentlessly, with little success. So year 2, I noticed them at the bottom of the balcony, and I noticed that they had started to spread about 25 feet from where they were. And this is when they made their entrance to the hydrangea. So that was absolutely devastating to see that they had made it that far in just one season. So the thrips that I thought were going to die in the winter did not die. They were able to overwinter, and then they started hatching and moving through the landscape. So that was, and that's in that one section. If you look on my pictures where you see the stairs around the back patio, that's at the bottom of the stairs is where they started in that area all the way until the back balcony. So in that period of time, when I noticed they were spreading, I sprayed relentlessly with neem oil, Dawn and water, plain water from the hose on blast. I even brought out some of the bigger chemicals like imidacloprid. I was exhausted from spraying constantly. I sprayed up to 3 times a day, every single day. But the issue was I was exhausting myself, and I would then have to take a lapse. We'd go on a vacation or something like that. I'd come back and they were full force again. So if you're spraying, that's great. If you're spraying on a small infestation, if you're just noticing it, using any of the sprays that are natural will most likely help you with some additional tips that I'm going to give you here in a second. So in the grow room of that next year, the second year, I started using yellow sticky traps, which are an absolute must. If you are treating these things indoors, I put them in the plants, like where I had like a container of a plant in the alligator kalanchoe. I would just stick a yellow sticky trap inside of there. That really worked. Now, a lot of the information I saw online said blue sticky traps. I found that the best rate of success for me was yellow sticky traps, and then replacing those sticky traps often. So just to being able to monitor kind of what was going on. So in that second year, I was able to get them really under control in the house because it was a more controlled environment. I also was not using synthetic fertilizers in my house. I have always used the worm tea, fish and seaweed fertilizer. So I was able to really kind of combat them very easily indoors because I was able to keep my eye on them more and just treat and prune. That was the other thing too. In that year, I started pruning back more of the things in the winter because I was bored. There was nothing going on. So I was really taking care of the plants, and I was able to really combat them with doing the hydrogen peroxide dump in the soil, doing the pruning, and that really helped. Yellow sticky traps, and was able to really combat them. So let's see what next. The outdoors. So this was my big thing with the outdoors, which my friend Kurt Wilkinson and I had quite a few conversations about this. And his episode is excellent, by the way. If you want to check out another episode, one of the very first episodes of Art of Gardening is with Kurt Wilkinson. And he is an absolute legend, genius, brilliant person that has a lot of experience with all this kind of stuff. So I was using, I was a brand new gardener, in my own house, gardening in, 2013, 2014, started dabbling with it, got really into it in like 2016, planted the whole sides. A lot of the pictures that you see, all of that was planted 2016 and beyond. So at that point in time, I was looking for a fertilizer because I wanted my hydrangea to grow really large, and I started collecting them, and I wanted them to be able to perform and look really good. So I started using synthetic fertilizers. I would pick up a bag of 10-10-10 or 12-12-12 at Lowe's or Home Depot, and it was so easy. I would just kind of take it and sprinkle it through the whole yard, and everything looked fabulous for a couple months. Everything was growing beautifully, and I didn't have any cares or concerns until I met the Thrips. So I was feeding the plant, basically at this point I learned that with feeding the synthetic fertilizers, I was feeding the plant basically steroids for the plant to get it really pumped up, produce blooms, produce all the things I was looking for. And at the same time, though, the plant was getting so much nitrogen and other nutrients that it couldn't process, that it stored those things as carbohydrates, which then turned sugar. So then any kind of piercing or sucking insect was all about any of these plants on the outside of my property that were eating and being, consuming these granular fertilizers. So that was one of the first things that I learned was a big no-no was the synthetic fertilizers. Even though they get the job done quickly, if you have an issue with any of your plants, with any of the, so not only was giving these plants the fertilizers, making them look beautiful, I didn't realize the traumatic impact that these plants were having because they were not producing and using the benefits of these nutrients as they should. It was gone straight to creating a sugar in the leaves. So not keeping a healthy plant with healthy root structure, it was focusing more on growth, more on bloom, instead of those things happening because of a healthy root structure. So the outdoor using the synthetic fertilizers, big no-no. The other thing that was happening was I got so frustrated, I started using the chemical, like harsh chemical insecticides to try and just obliterate them. Well, I learned a lot with that too, because in using those insecticides, what I did was kill off all of the beneficial insects, all of the predatory insects that I had naturally thriving in my little biodome out there. All of those things were gone. So there was nothing to feed on the thrips. And guess what? The thrips didn't die because the thrips have a way to adapt to the environment that they're in. So they were actually adapting when I was spraying them with all of these crazy things. And you name it, I was spraying it. I went from the neem oil to the insecticidal soap, imidacloprid, malathion. I mean, you name it, I tried it. If it said that it could help with thrips, I sprayed it. And so when all of those things had made their way with the thrips had become accustomed to them. So then they were able to live while I'm feeding them all of these sugars and carbohydrates from my plants, basically giving them a steroid to reproduce and to take over. And that's why within just a few short seasons, they were everywhere on this property. In every single quadrant of the property, there were thrips. First of all, at the advice of Kurt Wilkinson, I stopped immediately using all synthetic fertilizers and all harsh chemical insecticides. So that was last year. I stopped all of it the entire season. I did not use any of those things on the property. So it would make the plants less attractive to these sucking insects without having that sugar. And then also I would start to be able to bring back in the predatory insects that would help me control them. Okay. So a couple of different things with the, what I learned is that pruning is hugely beneficial. At first I wasn't pruning because I didn't want to prune back all my plants. I didn't want to lose branches randomly. I wanted the big, thick, full plants. So it really pained me to prune. Now I have no problem with that. If I see something that has a thrip on it, I will wipe out the entire area. If it's a columbine, which they love, I will remove the entire columbine. The entire thing, I will cut it down to the ground and remove all of the leaves. Because what I learned is that the thrips eggs will they will put their eggs inside of the bark of the plants or the branching of the plants, inside of all those grooves of the bark and the branch of the plant. They will put their eggs in those areas. They will also put the eggs inside of the leaf tissue, which that is crazy to think about because I never thought that would happen. I figured if you just spray them off, like everything says on the internet, just spray the leaves off with water or the soaps or whatever, and it should take care of the problem. It did not. So because I did not realize that they could be in the soil, they could be in the branches, they could be laying eggs in the leaves. So if you are not removing those areas, then you have a great chance of them being able to come back and continue their life cycle. So what else? So undersides of leaves, if you see a small, if you just notice them and they haven't spread, then being able to just remove those leaves completely, because underneath is where the pupa are and the translucent, right before they become the adults, they're underneath there feeding on the bottom of the leaf, and then they start to feed, they come up onto the top of the leaf. So getting rid of those things is ideal. So then last year I started to be able to get the spiders and the ladybugs and the lacewings. Believe it or not, they all started coming back to the property. And this year I've got full-fledged. I mean, I haven't killed a spider. I haven't sprayed anything. I mean, and it's like a jungle out there, but I have let everything just take its course. Again, no synthetic fertilizers. I use the fish and seaweed mixes from PETRATOOLS and the worm tea. Obviously, I love all those things. And then no insecticides. So just letting nature take its course. 35 degrees and below will stop the life cycle, but it won't kill the eggs. So they can overwinter in an even as harsh of an environment as Kansas City in the winter, where we've got snow on the ground for weeks at a time. They can still live in that. So definitely keep that in mind about being able to prevent them by attacking them as soon as you see the problem going on, being observant, being mindful. And I think the greatest thing that I learned from this lesson, which, it's been a battle and it's been very frustrating, and it has brought me, I mean, there were times I wanted to just give up, and I felt like I was just going to rip everything out and just go back to nothing because I was so overwhelmed with this process. But what I learned was there's such a delicate balance with Mother Nature. And when we as humans come into that balance and start to change things by fertilizing and insecticides and things like that, that we really upset that balance. And if we can leave things alone, or if we are going to treat them naturally, but if we can leave things alone, there is a much better chance that Mother Nature herself will resolve most of the issues that we have, not to mess with it. Because we can, to a certain extent, control it in certain things and not affect the health and the longevity of our gardens. But most of the time, when we are bringing things in that are not natural to our environment, you can guarantee that that's going to make some level of trouble. So learning all of these different things and combating this, I have to say I'm very proud of myself for overcoming this. This year, I have only seen maybe 10 thrips. And like I said, as soon as I've seen them, I've wiped out the entire area. And make sure, though, that you're not putting those scraps or materials into the yard waste compost piles on your property. Those would go into the bags and out to the yard waste for when they would come to pick up the garbage. So I wanted everything completely off of the property. So, learning about all of these different things in the last few years has made me a much stronger gardener. And also it's really increased my level of enjoying my garden because I no longer run around trying to control everything. I kind of just let it be and, kind of just enjoy it and not try to control it so much. So if you have any questions or comments about thrips, if you've tried other products that are natural or different methods of being able to use against the thrips, please leave it in the comments. And if you've learned anything from this episode, if there was anything in particular that you learned, please leave it in the comments. We'd love to have your feedback. But again, bringing houseplants in, make sure that you're drenching them with hydrogen peroxide. You can either do a 1-to-1 ratio. You can put the whole bottle directly into the soil. I have done that 1,000 times. That's what I treat my indoor houseplants with. And it'll also kill fungus gnats, by the way. So if you ever have a trouble with fungus gnats, which come from your soil being too wet indoors, and then it creates a fungus down inside in the top 2 inches of the soil, those fungus gnats start to grow. They feed off of that fungus. So what I found with that, this is totally random and completely off topic, but it's super important. I no longer have any fungus gnats in my house. I haven't had them for years because what you do is drench your soil with the hydrogen peroxide that will kill the eggs. It will kill larvae. It will kill all of it. And then I use diatomaceous earth, and I put that about 1 inch to 2 inches thick on the top of the plant, on the top of the soil. So if you do get another fungus gnat from somewhere and it tries to crawl down into that plant, it will get scratched up by the diatomaceous earth. It'll scratch the exoskeleton and it will dehydrate and die. But the hydrogen peroxide is huge because it will kill everything, but it's also extraordinarily beneficial for the roots of your plants. So it can help even if you have root rot in something. Giving it hydrogen peroxide will help heal the roots. With the way that it works, when you pour hydrogen peroxide on something, it bubbles up and kind of helps kill any bacteria. That's basically what it does in your soil, and it's safe for your plants. Your plant will not have any trouble from any kind of hydrogen peroxide in the soil. Now, I would not spray hydrogen peroxide directly 100% on your leaves. In fact, I don't condone that at all because it can burn and all of that, but I don't do that. So I just soak the soil. And like I said, it will kill anything that's in the soil. So if you are bringing your plants in from the summer, make sure you do that to prep them to be inside your house and not spread anything that's inside throughout the rest of your house. So I hope that you've learned something today. It has been a tremendous battle at this property for years, but I'm happy to say this is 100% under control by just making a few simple changes and allowing Mother Nature to do her thing. So thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you again on the next Art of Gardening.